Protests breaking out in Russia after Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny died, many believing, I think correctly, that his death was no coincidence. The Wall Street Journal, fearing his fate, better positions Putin's political ambitions. The editorial board writing this, quote, Navalny's death may be a sign Mr. Putin feels secure and therefore can risk provoking protests about Navalny's fate. Navalny's death wounds Russia's opposition for the foreseeable future. Here with a reaction to this, former CIA station chief who served in Moscow and a Fox News contributor, Dan Hoffman. Good to see you, Dan. What do you think of that assessment from the Journal's editors?
I have a slightly different take, which is that I think Vladimir Putin felt himself more weak. He's got elections coming up March 15, and he felt like he needed to demonstrate to his own security services and the population writ large that anyone who betrays him would suffer the sort of consequences that we've seen from the decision to kill Navalny. This was a decision, obviously, that could be made only once, and Vladimir Putin notably decided to take it today, or a couple of days ago. And I think it definitely reflects the extent to which Putin is concerned as the elections approach.
How legitimate, though, are these elections, right? Why would he be concerned? If he's killing critics, he can certainly rig things to his favor, as he has allegedly in the past, right?
Right. He will rig the elections as he has in the past, but he does rely on his security services to make all of that happen. And remember, just last summer, the head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, launched that failed mutiny and wound up 150 or so miles from Moscow. So Putin has to be concerned about his inner circle. That's why he chose to poison Navalny with Novichok, that banned chemical nerve agent, in August of 2020. He could have taken all sorts of other measures to have killed Navalny at that time, but he wanted to leave some breadcrumbs leading all the way back to the Kremlin, and maybe it's not so plausibly deniable, but enough to show his own security services that they better toe the line, or else they'll end up like Navalny or Sergei Skripal, whom he also poisoned in the UK.
So these are sort of like internal shows of force, it sounds like. Just a word on the protests that have erupted, relatively small, but still, that's an act of courage. I mean, any dissent whatsoever from this regime can get you thrown in prison or worse, as we've seen. So for people being willing to take to the streets, that's really something, maybe carrying that torch that Navalny did for so long.
Yeah, I think that's true. Before Navalny went back to Russia in January of 2021, he knew that he would be arrested and that he probably would die at one of those Siberian death camps. And he told his people in a video, his followers, and remember, he had over 6 million YouTube followers as he exposed massive corruption in Vladimir Putin's Kremlin. He told them that if something were to happen to him, if he were killed, it would demonstrate the weakness of the regime. And he emphasized that truth is power. Sila v pravde, he said in Russian. And I think that is going to be his legacy. We've seen hundreds of Russians being arrested in spite of draconian denials of freedom of assembly and freedom of speech in Russia. And I expect that to continue, and this to be Navalny's legacy.
President Biden a few days ago was, of course, outraged by this killing of Navalny. He had said back in 2020, Biden had, that there would be consequences for Russia if Navalny were to die in custody, which he now has. Biden was asked about that. He said, well, a lot has happened over the last 3 years. Sort of unclear what the U.S. might do, what the U.S. can do. What do you think about that?
Right. President Biden said that at a summit in the spring of 2021 with Vladimir Putin. And of course, since then, Russia invaded Ukraine, and the United States has armed Ukraine and mounted sanctions, additional sanctions against Russia. I think what we could do is bring the House back into session and pass that Ukraine aid bill. Ukraine is on the front lines defending Europe against Russia. No, it's not. It's Ukraine's existential war for their survival, and every day that Kiev is a sovereign nation, Ukraine's winning. They've caused over 300,000 Russian casualties. That's winning as well. Finland is now a NATO member. NATO is awakened from their post-Cold War slumber, and we're able to provide the kind of defense we need and deterrence from Vladimir Putin's aggressive Russia. I think we need the House back in session to talk about that threat to our space satellites and also to pass this Ukraine aid.
Now, I saw a Pew poll this morning. 74% of Americans believe that the Ukraine war is in America's best interest. So that could inform the debate in Congress as well moving forward. Dan Hoffman, thanks so much for your time this morning.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.